My son, the boy I once sold my wedding ring to keep in college, decided my presence in his home was worth exactly $1,500 a month. He thought he had a built-in housekeeper and a cash cow for life, a convenient fixture in his picture-perfect suburban world. So I disappeared overnight without a word. What he didn't count on, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that when I left, I took the secret nest egg his entire comfortable life was built upon. Now he's panicking, my phone is blowing up with his desperation, and he's about to learn the real cost of taking his mother for granted. Stick around and I'll tell you exactly how it all went down. Before we dive into the heart of this family drama, I'd love to feel a connection with all of you listening. It helps to know I'm not just talking into the void. Could you do me a favor and drop your city, state, or country in the comments below? And maybe let me know what time it is where you are. It's comforting to imagine us all sharing this moment, scattered across the globe. My story truly begins not with a fight, but with the quiet final click of a closing door. I'm Carol. I'm 67 years old, and for more of my life than not, my identity was wrapped up in two words: wife and mother. My husband, Frank, was my anchor. We built a real life together in a small 2-story house in Ohio, the kind with painted shutters and a porch swing that groaned like a happy old man. That house wasn't just wood and nails, it was a living thing. It held the echoes of Frank's booming laugh, the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco in the den, and the faint pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe tracking our children's height. We raised Mark and Sarah there, in a world that felt safe and full of a simple, sturdy love. We weren't wealthy people, not by a long shot. Frank was a manager at a local hardware store, and I was a school secretary. But we were rich in ways that money can't buy. Or so I believed. When Frank passed away from a massive heart attack 2 years ago, the foundation of my world turned to dust. The house, my steadfast companion for 4 decades, suddenly felt like a mausoleum. The silence was a physical weight pressing down on me. Every object whispered his name: his worn leather armchair, his half-finished crossword puzzle on the nightstand. Mark, ever the practical one, began calling every day. His voice, usually so confident, was laced with a carefully measured concern. "Mom, you can't stay in that big house alone," he'd insist. "It's not safe. It's too much for you to handle. Come live with us in Austin. Jessica and I have a guest suite with its own bathroom. The kids, Chloe and Leo, miss their grandma terribly." It sounded less like an invitation and more like a diagnosis with a prescribed cure. Selling the house was an agony I can't properly describe. It felt like a betrayal of Frank, of our life together. But the thought of hearing my grandchildren's laughter filling the silence was a powerful lure. So I did it. I packed up a lifetime of memories into cardboard boxes, each one sealed with a strip of tape that felt like a final goodbye, and I drove south towards the relentless Texas sun. Mark and Jessica's home in a manicured Austin suburb was like something out of an architectural magazine. It was all clean lines, soaring ceilings, and cool gray tones. Polished concrete floors gleamed under recessed lighting. It was stunningly beautiful and utterly sterile. There was no comfortable clutter, no stack of mail on the counter, no crayon marks on the walls. It was a house designed to be looked at, not lived in. From the moment I arrived, I felt like a dusty, sentimental antique placed in a minimalist art gallery. I didn't fit. I tried though. Lord, how I tried. I threw myself into the role of the helpful, live-in grandmother. I learned to navigate their high-tech coffee maker. I did load after load of laundry, and I cooked the old comfort foods I thought would bring a touch of warmth to their cool, gray world. But my efforts were always met with polite, smiling resistance. I was a guest, a temporary fixture, and I was beginning to understand that my welcome had an expiration date. The precise moment my status shifted from cherished mother to financial liability occurred on a Tuesday morning. I'll never forget the cruel irony of how beautiful the day was. The Texas sunlight, so different from the gentle Ohio light I was used to, slanted through the huge kitchen windows, illuminating the room with a crisp, clean glow. It should have felt cheerful. Instead, it felt like being under a spotlight. I was wiping down the vast, granite kitchen island, a surface so sleek and cold it felt like it belonged in a laboratory, when Mark came in. He was already in his work uniform, a starched shirt and pressed slacks, but his presence felt casual, almost lazy. He didn't greet me, didn't ask how I slept. He poured himself a bowl of cereal and sat down at the island, his eyes already locked on the screen of his tablet. The only sounds were the clinking of his spoon against the ceramic bowl, and the hum of the stainless steel refrigerator. He took a few bites, swallowed, and then he cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but it landed in the quiet room with the force of a gavel. "Mom," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. He was still looking at his tablet. "Jessica and I were running the numbers on the household budget last night." I paused, my hand hovering over the countertop. A familiar, cold dread began to pool in my stomach. I knew this tone. This was business, Mark. It was the voice of a man about to close a deal, a voice that left no room for sentiment. "It's just things are tighter than you'd think," he went on, flicking his finger across the screen. "The mortgage on this place isn't cheap. Then you have the property taxes, the car payments, the kids' tuition for their private school. It all adds up faster than you can blink." He sighed, a theatrical sound of a man burdened by immense responsibility. And of course, having another person living in the house has a real financial impact. On the grocery bill, the water, the electricity. He let the sentence hang there, unfinished. He was forcing me to ask. He was making me pull the trigger on my own execution. My own voice sounded small and foreign when I finally spoke. "What are you saying, Mark?" He finally lifted his head, but his eyes didn't meet mine. They focused on a point on the wall just over my shoulder. "We just feel it's only fair that you start to contribute financially. We've discussed it, and we've landed on $1,500 a month. We think that's a reasonable figure." $1,500. The number seemed to suck all the air out of the room. It wasn't the amount, not really. It was the cold, hard calculation behind it. It was the reduction of my entire existence, mother, grandmother, grieving widow, into a monthly fee. My mind flashed back with dizzying speed to a moment 20 years ago. I was standing in a dusty pawn shop, the smell of old cigars and desperation in the air. I was sliding my gold wedding band, the symbol of my life with Frank, across a scratched glass counter. Mark's college had raised its tuition unexpectedly, and we were short. There hadn't been a moment's hesitation. His future was worth more than any object. And now this, the boy whose education I had secured with a piece of my heart, was billing me for the space I occupied in his life. The urge to scream, to weep, to throw the list of my sacrifices in his face was a physical force inside me. But I was paralyzed. I just stood there, the damp dishcloth in my hand, my knuckles aching from my tight grip. He took my stunned silence for acceptance. "Good," he said, a quick, almost imperceptible sigh of relief escaping him. He was already looking back at his tablet. "I'll set you up on the monthly autodraft from your account. It's just cleaner that way." Cleaner. Yes, it was all very clean. A clean, neat transaction. He stood up, rinsed his bowl in the sink, and walked towards the door, grabbing his briefcase. He didn't look at me again. He didn't say, "I love you." He didn't even say goodbye. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the silent, sun-drenched kitchen. In the space of 5 minutes I had been demoted. I was no longer family. I was an income stream. And the worst part? I was just beginning to understand the terms of my new contract. The wound of Mark's transaction festered, made septic by the hypocrisy that followed. The ink was barely dry on my new rental agreement when my daughter Sarah arrived on their doorstep. At 28, she was in the throes of another life crisis. Her latest live-in boyfriend, a musician with more charisma than cash, had unceremoniously kicked her out. She appeared with 2 overstuffed suitcases, a cloud of drama, and a river of tears. They welcomed her with open arms. She was given the spacious guest room downstairs, the one with the ensuite bathroom and the view of the pool. She draped her trendy, expensive clothes over every available surface, slept until 11, and spent her afternoons networking by the pool, phone in hand. Her contribution to the household was a trail of empty coffee mugs and a perpetually damp towel on the bathroom floor. Her financial contribution? 0. Absolutely nothing. After a week of watching this unfold, I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. I found Mark alone in the garage one afternoon, organizing his golf clubs. I tried to keep my tone gentle, inquisitive. "Mark, honey," I started. "It's lovely to have Sarah here, of course. I was just wondering." Did you and Jessica discuss a financial arrangement with her, like you did with me? He stopped what he was doing and turned to me, his face instantly defensive. That's completely different, Mom, and you know it, he said, his voice sharp. Sarah's in a crisis. She just got her heart broken. She's vulnerable. She needs our support, not a bill. And what do you think I am? I wanted to scream. A 67-year-old widow who just lost her husband of 45 years and sold her home. You don't think I'm vulnerable? You don't think I need support? But the words wouldn't come out. They were trapped behind a wall of disbelief and hurt. I just nodded and walked away. The disparity was a constant public humiliation. While Sarah was finding herself by ordering expensive meals on DoorDash using Mark's account, I was being audited over my personal toiletries. I remember standing in the aisle at Target with Jessica, a bottle of my favorite Olay moisturizer in my hand. She glanced at it, then at the price tag. You know, Carol, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. The generic store brand is right here and it's half the price. We have to watch our pennies, you know. I quietly put the Olay back on the shelf, my cheeks burning with shame. That evening, a delivery truck dropped off a brand new Peloton bike for their home gym. I started to feel like I was living in a twisted fairy tale, where I was the scullery maid who had to pay for her own rags, while the flighty princess was showered with gifts. My every action was scrutinized. Mom, please make sure you separate the whites and colors more carefully. This pink sock got in with my work shirts, Mark would complain. Carol, could you try to be a little quieter in the kitchen in the morning? You woke Leo up, Jessica would sigh. I was being whittled down day by day. My confidence, my sense of self-worth, my very identity as the matriarch of this family was being eroded. They weren't just taking my money, they were taking my voice. I was becoming a function, not a person. The one who paid her rent, did the chores, and stayed out of the way. And I was beginning to learn a terrible lesson. In their world, love wasn't a bond, it was a commodity. And my stock was plummeting. I thought I had understood the depths of their disregard, but I was naive. There were lower levels of hell I had yet to visit. The descent happened on a sweltering July afternoon. The air conditioning was humming loudly, a constant drone that seemed to match the anxiety buzzing under my skin. I was in the living room, meticulously folding a mountain of laundry, a chore that had silently and completely become mine. Jessica swept into the room, not walking but vibrating with a frantic, theatrical energy. Her hands were fluttering at her throat. I can't believe it, she said, her voice an octave higher than usual. They're gone. Just gone. I looked up from a pair of Chloe's tiny jeans. What's gone, Jessica? My diamond earrings, she gasped, her eyes wide with manufactured panic. The ones my mother gave me for our 5th anniversary. They were on my jewelry dish this morning. I saw them. And now they've vanished. She began a chaotic search, pulling open drawers in the console table, lifting cushions from the sofa. It was a performance, and I was her intended audience. Her eyes kept darting towards me, sharp and accusatory. It's the strangest thing, she murmured, loud enough for me to hear clearly. Things don't just get up and walk away on their own. She stopped, turning to face me directly, her expression a perfect mask of concern. Carol, you were tidying up our bedroom this morning, weren't you? To collect the laundry. The air was sucked from my lungs. The folded jeans fell from my lap. The accusation was so vile, so monstrously untrue, it defied comprehension. This woman, whose children I bathed and tucked into bed, whose home I cleaned, whose life I made easier in 1,000 small ways every single day, was painting me as a common thief. Jessica, I began, my voice a broken, trembling thing. I don't know what you're implying, but I would never ever touch your things. I'm not implying anything, she said, her voice turning sharp and cold. I'm stating a fact. The earrings were there, you were in the room, and now they are not there. It's just a sequence of events. The poison she had so carefully injected into the air hung there all evening. Dinner was a silent, agonizing affair. Even the children were subdued, sensing the dangerous currents flowing between the adults. Afterward, when I was rinsing dishes in the sink, my back to the room, Mark came and stood behind me. I didn't have to turn around to feel the cowardice radiating from him. Mom, he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. Look, Jessica's a wreck. Those earrings meant the world to her. He paused. Listen, maybe you just picked them up to look at them and put them in your pocket and forgot? Or put them somewhere for safekeeping. It happens. If you just tell us where they are, we can forget this whole thing ever happened. No harm, no foul. No harm, no foul. The casualness of his betrayal was a physical blow. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't outraged on my behalf. He was managing the situation. He was asking me, his mother, to confess to a lie to smooth his wife's ruffled feathers. He was asking me to trade my integrity for his domestic peace. I turned off the water and slowly turned to face him. I looked my son in the eye. "There is nothing to find, Mark," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Because I did not take them. And the fact that you believe I'm capable of it, that is harm. And it is a foul. And I will not forget it." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving him standing there. The next morning, of course, the earrings miraculously reappeared. Can you believe it? They must have fallen behind the dresser. Jessica announced brightly at breakfast, dangling them from her fingers. There was no apology. Not a single word of remorse. But the damage was done. They had drawn a line in the sand. And I finally knew without a shadow of a doubt which side I was on. If the false accusation was a private dagger, the backyard barbecue was a public flogging. A few weeks later, Mark and Jessica decided to host a party for what seemed like their entire social circle. The patio was crowded with young, successful couples in crisp linen shirts and expensive sandals, all sipping craft beer and talking about interest rates and preschool applications. Once again, I defaulted to the role of unpaid staff. I replenished the bowl of guacamole. I shuttled empty bottles to the recycling bin. I wiped up a spilled drink. I moved through the party like a ghost, essential but invisible. A few people offered me a tight, polite smile, the kind you give to the caterer, before turning back to their animated conversations. I was a prop in the stage play of their perfect life. Mark and Jessica, the couple so successful they even have a live-in grandmother. Mark was holding court by his gleaming stainless steel grill. He was laughing, animated, the very picture of the charming host and provider. I was standing near the drink table, trying to look busy, when his voice boomed across the patio, deliberately loud. "Yeah, having my mom living with us has been a real game changer," he announced to a circle of his friends. A half-dozen heads turned in my direction. I froze, a bottle of ketchup in my hand, suddenly pinned by their collective gaze. Mark took a long pull from his beer and grinned. "I mean, it's a win-win. The kids get their grandma, and her rent check covers our landscaping and pool service every month. Can't beat a deal like that, right?" A wave of laughter followed. It wasn't mean-spirited, not exactly. It was worse. It was casual, appreciative laughter. The laughter of people who understood and respected a good financial transaction. My son had just publicly rebranded me. I was no longer his mother. I was a sweet deal. My worth, my very presence in his life, had been quantified and announced to the world. I was equivalent to a man with a leaf blower and some chlorine tablets. A hot, prickly shame washed over me. I felt my cheeks flush crimson. I wanted to evaporate. I wanted to sink into the perfectly manicured lawn. I managed to conjure a smile, a brittle, pathetic thing that felt like it might crack my face in two. I gave a little nod, as if I were in on the clever joke. But inside, every last bit of my spirit was curling up into a tight, wounded ball. I was turning to make my escape back into the house when a woman detached herself from the group and walked towards me. She was a bit older than the others, with laugh lines around her eyes and a genuinely warm expression. "Please don't pay him any mind," she said in a low, conspiratorial voice, gently touching my arm. "I'm Linda, your next-door neighbor." And that was a truly classless thing to say. I could only manage to whisper my name. "Carol." "Well, Carol," she said, her eyes full of a sympathy that felt like a drink of cool water in a desert. "You look like you need a refuge. My back patio is a lot quieter than this one. If you ever want to slip through the hedge for a cup of tea, you're more than welcome." This small gesture of human decency from a complete stranger felt monumental. In a crowd of people who saw me as a financial arrangement, one person had seen me as a human being. The lump in my throat was so thick I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a wave of gratitude so intense it almost buckled my knees. Linda's invitation wasn't just for tea. It was a crack of light in a very dark room. And it was the first step on a path I didn't even know I was about to take. If you were me in that moment, what would you have done? Would you have confronted Mark in front of his friends? Or would you have walked away? I'm fascinated to know how others would handle that kind of public humiliation. Please tell me your thoughts in the comments. The following morning, I woke before the sun, the memory of Mark's words still ringing in my ears. I couldn't bear the thought of facing them at the breakfast table. So, I did something I hadn't done since I'd arrived in Austin. I did something for myself. I put on my walking shoes, slipped out the back door, and walked through the dew-damp grass to the hedge that separated our properties. I found the small gap Linda had mentioned and stepped through. It felt like crossing into another world. Her backyard wasn't a manicured showpiece. It was a vibrant, slightly wild English-style garden, overflowing with fragrant roses, lavender, and buzzing honeybees. Linda was already there, sitting on her patio in a comfortable-looking wicker chair, a steaming mug in her hands. She smiled when she saw me, as if she'd been expecting me. "I had a feeling I might see you this morning," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. "Tea or coffee?" As she handed me a cheerful hand-painted mug filled with hot tea. The simple act of being served, of being cared for, felt so foreign and so wonderful that I almost started to cry. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, just watching the garden wake up. "It's not my place," Linda began gently, "but I've seen you over there, Carol. I see you in the garden with the kids. I see you taking out the trash cans. I see you working, always working. And I don't often see you smiling." Her words were so simple, so observant. It was the first time in over a year that I felt truly seen. And with that validation, the dam broke. I told her everything. The story poured out of me like a toxic flood. The sterile house, the transactional demand for rent, the blatant double standard with Sarah, the shame of the moisturizer incident, the vile accusation about the earrings, and the final crushing humiliation at the party. I talked until my throat was raw, until there were no more words left. Linda listened without judgment. She just nodded, her expression full of a deep, knowing empathy. When I finally finished, she reached across the table and patted my hand. "Carol," she said, her voice firm but kind, "you are a 67-year-old woman, a widow. This is supposed to be your time to rest, to enjoy your grandchildren, to live in peace. Instead, they have turned you into their employee. This is not a family arrangement. It's an exploitation." She leaned in a little closer. "You know you don't have to accept this, right? You have your own life to live. It's not over. A life of my own." The phrase hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. I had been a wife, a mother, a grandmother. The role of just Carol was one I hadn't played in a very long time. It sounded terrifying. It sounded selfish. But sitting there in the quiet sanctuary of Linda's garden, it also sounded like freedom. I walked back to the gray house that afternoon feeling different. A tiny, resilient seed of an idea had been planted in the barren soil of my spirit. That night, after the house was dark and silent, I opened my laptop. My hands trembled as I opened a web browser. I wasn't looking at family photo albums or recipes for pot roast. I was looking for a way out. I typed "quiet retirement towns in Texas" into the search bar. Page after page of possibilities loaded, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of something I had almost forgotten: hope. How could I make it happen? The logistics seemed impossible, but the question itself was a revolution. The biggest obstacle to my escape, the one that seemed like an insurmountable mountain, was money. They knew my finances, or so they thought. They knew about my widow's pension and my Social Security. They knew I had given them a large sum for the down payment on their house. They had calculated my rent, based on what they thought I could afford. But they didn't know the whole story. Frank had always been the cautious one, the planner. "Always keep a little something tucked away for a real emergency, Carol," he used to say. "A just-in-case fund that nobody knows about." His life insurance policy had been more substantial than I had let on. When I gave Mark that money for the house, I told him it was the lion's share. It was a lie born of a strange, prescient instinct. I had held back a significant portion, my just-in-case fund, and deposited it into a high-yield savings account at a different bank, an account with paperless statements sent to a private email address. At the time, I felt a sharp pang of guilt for my deception. Now that guilt had transformed into a profound, life-saving gratitude. Frank, even in death, was still taking care of me. The emergency was here. My secret plan began to unfurl in the dark, silent hours of the night. I became a spy in my own life, operating in the shadows of the family that thought they had me all figured out. My first clandestine act was a phone call to a real estate agent in Fredericksburg, a woman named Susan whose picture on her website looked kind. I spoke to her in whispers from the walk-in pantry, surrounded by neatly organized rows of organic snacks and gluten-free pasta, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "I'm looking for something small, manageable," I told her. "A place with a little garden." The pre-approval process for a small mortgage was surprisingly swift, with my secret nest egg serving as a hefty down payment. The dream of the little cottage with the oak tree began to feel less like a fantasy and more like a tangible reality. During the day, I was a master of deception. I was quiet, helpful, compliant Carol. I baked cookies with Chloe, I helped Leo with his homework, I listened to Jessica's complaints about her yoga instructor. But inside, I was a general planning a military campaign. I began the slow, methodical process of sorting through my belongings. It was an emotional excavation. This photo comes with me. This old serving platter? It can stay. I was separating the artifacts of my past life from the essential elements of my future one. I bought a set of sturdy moving boxes, telling Jessica they were for storing my winter clothes in the garage. At night, I would pack one box at a time, labeling it with a discreet code, and then sliding it to the very back of my closet, hidden behind my coats. Each packed box was a small victory, a tangible step towards my liberation. The constant fear of discovery was exhausting, but it was overshadowed by a thrilling, empowering sense of purpose. They saw me as a frail, dependent old woman. They had no idea I was orchestrating the biggest rebellion of my life, right under their noses. Before I pull back the curtain on what happened next, and believe me when I say the fallout was more explosive and satisfying than I ever could have imagined, I just want to pause and say thank you. Thank you for being here, for investing your time in my story. Talking about these deeply personal family issues isn't easy, and it means the world to know that there are people out there who are listening and who understand. If this story is resonating with you and you want to follow it through to the end, please take a quick second to click that subscribe button and give this video a like. It truly does help my story find its way to others who might be feeling trapped and need to hear that there is a way out. Alright, let's get back to it. My plan was in motion. My finances were secure. My escape route was mapped out. All I needed now was the perfect window of opportunity to make my final move. And as fate would have it, my own son was about to serve it up to me on a silver platter, completely oblivious that he was not just planning a vacation, but also orchestrating his own downfall. The perfect opportunity arrived wrapped in mouse ears and sprinkled with pixie dust. For months, the primary topic of conversation in the house had been the upcoming family vacation to Disney World. I sat through countless dinner discussions about flight times, hotel choices, and which character dining experience was an absolute must. I was of course not included in these plans. Jessica had explained it to me with a saccharine smile. "It's really just a trip for our little nuclear family, Carol. A chance for us to bond. You understand." I understood perfectly. I was the hired help and the help doesn't go on vacation. I feigned a gentle grandmotherly enthusiasm. All the while a secret triumphant countdown was ticking away in my head. A full week. They would be gone for 7 whole days. It was a gift from the universe. It was more than enough time to vanish without a trace. Then, about a week before their departure, Mark committed his final fatal error in judgment. He found me in the living room one evening, where I was dutifully ironing a pile of his work shirts. He lingered in the doorway, shifting his weight awkwardly, a clear sign he was about to ask for something. "Hey, Mom," he started, his tone attempting a casualness that he couldn't quite pull off. "Can I talk to you for a sec?" I set the iron on its heel and gave him my full attention. "So this Disney trip," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Man, you wouldn't believe how expensive it's gotten. It's really adding up to more than we budgeted for. The park tickets, the food, the souvenirs for the kids. It's insane." I remained silent, letting him squirm. I had a sickening premonition about where this was headed. "And well, I know you do so much for us already," he continued, the lie so blatant it was almost comical. "And I hate to even ask this, But Jessica and I were wondering if you might be able to help us out a little bit. Just a loan. A couple of thousand, maybe? It would just give us some breathing room. Let us really enjoy the trip and give the kids that magical experience without having to stress over every penny. I stared at him. I looked at his handsome, earnest face, the face of the boy I had raised to be a good man, and I felt nothing but a profound, bottomless disappointment. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was staggering. He was charging me rent to live in my room. His wife had accused me of being a thief. He had publicly mocked me. And now he had the audacity to ask me to subsidize the very vacation I was excluded from. It was in that moment that the last flickering ember of my maternal softness was extinguished. It was snuffed out, leaving behind only cold, hard ash. The hurt was gone, the anger was gone, and all that remained was a chilling, absolute clarity. A small, serene smile touched my lips. Probably looked kind. It wasn't. It was the smile of a woman who knew she held all the cards. Of course, I'll have to look at my finances, Mark, I said, my voice smooth as glass. Let me see what I can do. His face flooded with relief. Oh, Mom, thank you. You're a lifesaver. You're the best. He gave my shoulder a quick, grateful squeeze before hurrying off to tell Jessica the good news. He was a fool. He thought he was getting a loan. He had no idea he was giving me my final paycheck. He had just bought and paid for my freedom. The morning of their departure was a masterclass in domestic chaos. The foyer was an obstacle course of brightly colored suitcases. The children, high on the promise of Mickey Mouse, were practically bouncing off the walls. Jessica, armed with a clipboard and a frantic expression, was issuing a constant stream of commands. Through it all, I was an oasis of calm. I played my role to perfection. I made a hearty breakfast of their favorite chocolate chip pancakes. I found Leo's missing sunglasses. I braided Chloe's hair. I hugged them both fiercely at the door, breathing in the sweet scent of their shampoo and whispering that Grandma loved them to the moon and back. It was the only honest thing I did all morning. Have the most wonderful time, I said, smiling warmly at Mark and Jessica as they wrestled the last of the luggage into their massive SUV. I stood on the porch, waving with genuine enthusiasm until their car disappeared around the corner. The second it was out of sight, my smile vanished. The curtain fell on the final act of my performance. It was time. My escape was planned with military precision. I had already arranged for a local moving company, booked under Linda's name to avoid any paper trail, to arrive in 2 hours for the few pieces of furniture I was taking. But the first phase of my operation was already in motion. A discreet car service, not a flashy Uber, was due to arrive in 10 minutes for my personal effects and me. I moved through the now silent house with a focused energy. The boxes I had secretly packed were carried out to the porch. I stripped the bed in my room, folded the linens neatly, and left them on the mattress. I walked through the house one last time, a ghost gliding through the museum of my recent unhappiness. I felt no nostalgia, no sadness. This wasn't my home. It was a beautifully decorated cage. On the cold granite island in the kitchen, in the exact spot where Mark had delivered his verdict on my financial obligations, I placed a single, crisp white envelope. Inside, the note was short and devoid of emotion. Mark and Jessica, thank you for the accommodation. I have found a place of my own that is a better fit for me. There is no need for you to worry. Sincerely, Carol. I purposefully did not sign it, Mom. That name now felt like a uniform I was finally allowed to take off. Next to the envelope, I placed the key to the front door. My driver arrived precisely on time. As we pulled away from the curb, I allowed myself one last look at the house. It stood there, imposing and perfect, a monument to a life I was so grateful to be leaving behind. I felt no anger. I felt no regret. I felt only the quiet, powerful hum of a new engine turning over. I was a 67-year-old runaway, and I had never felt more alive. It's an incredible feeling, knowing you're all still here, sharing this journey with me. I appreciate you sticking with it more than you know. If you're still listening, could you do me a small favor? Just type the number 1 in the comments. It's like a little wave, letting me know you're in the car with me on this ride to freedom. It means the world. The 90-minute drive from the sterile suburbs of Austin to the historic heart of Fredericksburg was like traveling through a portal to another time. The landscape transformed from concrete highways and sprawling strip malls to rolling green hills dotted with ancient live oaks. With every mile that passed, I felt the tight coil of anxiety that had been my constant companion for the last year begin to unwind. Susan, my wonderful real estate agent, was waiting for me on the front porch of the cottage, just as she'd promised. She had a kind, crinkly smile and a keychain in her hand. The cottage itself was even more charming than the pictures had let on. It was a small German-style stone house, painted a cheerful butter yellow with bright blue shutters. A massive oak tree, a gentle giant, stood sentinel in the front yard. "Welcome home, Carol," Susan said as she handed me the keys. The weight of them in my palm felt solid, real. Home. The word resonated through my entire being. I had a home again. My home. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I had made the right decision. The air smelled of old wood, lemon polish, and the faint sweet scent of the honeysuckle growing on the fence outside. Sunlight streamed through the wavy, antique glass of the windows, painting golden patterns on the original pine floors. It wasn't a big house, but it had a big heart. It felt like it was giving me a hug. The small moving truck with my carefully curated belongings arrived an hour later. By late afternoon, my bed was set up, my favorite armchair was sitting by the window, and a box of my most cherished books was on the floor beside it. That first night, I didn't bother unpacking the kitchen. I sat on my own porch swing, a brand new one I had ordered ahead of time, and ate a simple salad out of a plastic container from the local market. I watched the fireflies begin their nightly dance in the twilight. I listened to the symphony of crickets, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a profound sense of peace. The days that followed were a gift. They were filled with simple, quiet joys. I found a local nursery and bought tomato plants for my little garden plot. I spent an entire afternoon in a dusty antique shop, finding the perfect small table for my entryway. I set up my coffee maker and enjoyed the ritual of brewing a pot just for myself, drinking it from my favorite mug without worrying if I was being too loud. I deliberately kept my phone turned off, tucked away in a drawer. I knew that back in Austin a storm was brewing. The Disney magic would wear off, and they would return to find a neatly made bed in an empty room. The confusion, the irritation, the eventual panic, it was all coming. But for these first precious days, I created a bubble of tranquility around myself. I was reclaiming my life one peaceful moment at a time. I was healing. And I knew I would need every ounce of this newfound strength for the confrontation that was inevitably heading my way. They thought they had lost their tenant. They had no idea they had lost their foundation. After 5 glorious days of self-imposed exile from the digital world, I knew I had to face the music. I took my phone out of the drawer, plugged it in and steeled myself. The moment it powered on, it began to convulse in my hand, a relentless series of buzzes and pings. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree, choked with notifications. 32 missed calls, 21 voicemails, more than 60 text messages. It was a digital onslaught of panic and rage. With a trembling finger, I opened my voicemail. The messages were a perfect chronicle of their descent into chaos. The first one was from Mark, recorded on the evening they returned. His voice was tight with confusion. "Mom? We're home. Your room is empty. I found your note. What does this mean? A place of your own. This is a joke, right? Call me. Now." The second voicemail, timestamped 3 hours later, had a harder edge. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore, Mom. I've been calling you for hours. Where the hell are you? You can't just pack up and leave without a word. The kids are upset. Jessica is upset. You owe us an explanation." The third one, from the next morning, was laced with pure irritation. "All right, I've had it. This is completely irresponsible. I'm going to have to find someone to help with the kids after school now. And what about your rent? You know it's due on the 1st. Are you going to mail a check or what's the plan here?" The rent. Even now, his primary concern was the rent. Then I moved on to the texts, a waterfall of guilt, manipulation, and self-pity. "Jessica. Carol, I cannot begin to tell you how disappointed I am. To abandon your family like this is unforgivable. Chloe cried for an hour last night. She thinks her grandma doesn't love her anymore. I hope you're proud of yourself. Sarah, seriously, Mom? You just bolt? You couldn't even say goodbye? Now I have to listen to Mark and Jessica freaking out all day. You've made things so much harder for everyone. Harder for everyone. Not once in the dozens of messages did a single one of them ask the most basic question. Mom, are you okay? Are you safe? Are you happy? Their concern wasn't for me, the person. It was for the services I provided. The cook, the cleaner, the babysitter, the renter. The intricate machine of their comfortable life had thrown a gear, and they were furious at the broken part, not worried about it. I saved the last, most recent voicemail from Mark for the end. The manufactured concern and irritation were gone. All that was left was a raw, primal panic. His voice was thin and reedy, cracking with stress. Mom, you have to pick up the phone. I need to talk to you. It isn't about the rent anymore. I was looking at the bank statements. The joint account you had with Dad. The savings account. It's empty. Mom, where is the money? What did you do with the money? What did you do? And there it was. The real reason for the storm. The mask was completely gone, revealing the greedy, entitled truth that had been hiding underneath all along. My heart, instead of breaking, felt strangely calm. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. And I knew with absolute certainty what my final response had to be. Mark's final, frantic voicemail was followed by a text message that was even more revealing. It was a long, rambling paragraph, typed out in a fury, riddled with typos and exclamation points. Mom, where is the money? I am not kidding. I am about to call the police and report it stolen. That was Dad's money. It was our family inheritance. It was supposed to be for us, for the kids' future, for their college. You had no right to just take it and run away. You have stolen from your own grandchildren. How could you do this to us? After everything we have done for you. Stolen. There was that word again. Seemed to be their favorite weapon. When cornered, when their behavior was indefensible, they resorted to accusing me of theft. First, it was the fiction of the diamond earrings. Now, it was the fantasy that my husband's legacy belonged to them. Everything we have done for you. The audacity of that single phrase was almost breathtaking. What had they done for me? They had taken me in only to turn me into a paying servant. They had offered me a home only to fill it with rules and criticism. They had given me a place at their table only to mock me in front of their friends. Their generosity was a carefully constructed illusion, and the price of admission was my dignity and my checkbook. I sat there in my sun-filled living room, in my comfortable armchair, with my little dog Frank sleeping at my feet, and I felt a profound sense of detachment. The man who sent that text message was not the son I had raised. He was a stranger, a man consumed by an entitlement so deep, he couldn't see the monstrousness of his own words. I realized I didn't owe him a long emotional explanation. I didn't owe him an argument. I owed him nothing but the cold, hard truth. With calm, steady fingers, I typed my one and only reply. I composed each word with care, ensuring there was no room for misinterpretation. Mark, let me be perfectly clear. The money was not an inheritance for you to spend. It was your father's life insurance policy. Its sole purpose, as stated in his will, was to provide for my care and well-being in his absence, so that I would never be a burden on anyone. You are a healthy man with a six-figure job. Your father raised you to be self-sufficient. This money is now fulfilling its intended purpose. It has provided me with a safe, independent, and peaceful home. You have not been stolen from. You have simply been denied access to something that was never yours. There is nothing further to discuss. I read the message twice. It was factual. It was final. It was irrefutable. I hit send. Almost immediately, the three little dots appeared. A sign that he was typing a furious, sputtering response. I didn't give him the satisfaction of sending it. I navigated to his contact profile, my finger hovering for a moment over the button that would change everything. Then with a firm, decisive tap, I pressed block. A second later, I did the same for Jessica's number. And then for Sarah's. A deep, cleansing breath left my body in a long sigh. It was over. The constant barrage of demands, the endless emotional manipulation, the toxic accusations. I had silenced them all with a few taps on a screen. It wasn't a shout, it was a whisper. It was the quiet, resolute click of a door being locked against the storm. In the profound silence that followed, I felt the first true, untainted moment of my new life. The war was over. And I had won. The silence that followed my digital exodus was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It wasn't an absence of noise, it was the presence of peace. The constant hum of anxiety that had been the background music of my life for the past year finally faded away. My shoulders, which I hadn't realized were permanently hunched up around my ears, began to relax. My life in Fredericksburg began to take root and blossom. I discovered that the small, simple routines I built for myself were a powerful form of healing. I started each day by taking my new dog, Frank, for a walk as the sun rose, a thermos of coffee in my hand. We'd walk through the quiet, historic streets, and I would admire the old stone houses and the meticulously tended gardens. I felt a sense of belonging in that town, a quiet kinship with the history and the slow, gentle pace of life. I joined the local gardening club, a lively group of women my age who were a mix of lifelong Texans and retirees from all over the country. They were funny, wise, and refreshingly direct. They talked about compost and aphids, about their grandchildren and their creaky knees. No one was trying to impress anyone else. We'd spend hours in the community greenhouse, our hands covered in dirt, and I felt more at home there than I ever had in my son's sterile gray house. Twice a week, I volunteered at the town library for their children's story hour. Sitting in a small chair, surrounded by a circle of wide-eyed, eager little faces, I rediscovered the pure, uncomplicated joy of being a grandmother. The children didn't want anything from me except a story, a funny voice for the big bad wolf, and a smile. It was a balm to my soul, reminding me that love didn't have to be a transaction. I was slowly, carefully rebuilding my identity. I was no longer just a wife, a mother, or a renter. I was Carol. I was a gardener. I was a storyteller. I was a terrible but enthusiastic watercolor painter. I was a woman who enjoyed her own company. One crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope was a cheap, plain one from the drugstore, and my name was written on it in the wobbly, earnest printing of a child. There was no return address. My heart gave a little lurch as I carefully opened it. Inside was a single piece of folded notebook paper. On it was a crayon drawing of two stick figures. One was tall, with a cloud of scribbled gray hair. The other was small, with a lopsided smile and a big pink bow. They were holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Below the drawing, in that same careful, childish pencil, were 5 words. "Dear Grandma, I miss you. Are you happy now? Love, Chloe." I sank down onto my porch swing, clutching the drawing to my chest, and the tears I had held back for so long finally came. They weren't tears of grief or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated love. Through all the greed and the ugliness, one small, true thing had reached me. My granddaughter hadn't asked when I was coming back. She hadn't asked for a present. She had simply asked about my happiness. I found the address for her private school online, and that very day I wrote her back. I told her that yes, Grandma was very, very happy. I told her all about my little yellow house, my funny dog Frank, and the tomatoes I was growing in my garden. I sealed the letter, a bridge of love built on the purest of foundations, a connection that existed outside the toxic mess her parents had created. It was enough. It's been over a year now since I locked that door and started my new life. The silence from Mark and Jessica has been absolute, a void I have no desire to fill. I continue to exchange letters with my granddaughter Chloe. Our correspondence is our own little secret, a quiet testament to a bond that money and selfishness could not break. My dear friend Linda from Austin and I have a standing phone call every Sunday afternoon. My life is small now, but it is deep and it is rich. And most importantly, it is mine. I am often alone, but I have not felt lonely for a single day. The deepest loneliness I have ever known was in that big, beautiful house, surrounded by family who saw me as a utility. The solitude I now cherish, in the comfort of my own little cottage, is a peaceful and nourishing companion. I wake each morning to the sound of birds, not the sound of my own anxious thoughts. I decide my own schedule, I eat what I please, I live by my own rules. It is a quiet, radical act of self-preservation. This entire painful chapter taught me a lesson that I was long overdue to learn. You can pour your entire being into your children. You can sacrifice, support, and love them with every fiber of your soul. But you cannot control how they receive that love. You cannot force them to see your worth. You cannot make them treat you with the dignity you deserve. Ultimately, you have to be the one who demands it for yourself. You have to be the one who is willing to walk away when your value is questioned. And so, this is the message I want to leave with you. If you are listening to this story today, and it echoes in some painful, familiar way in your own life, if you are feeling unseen, unappreciated, or taken for granted by the very people you have given everything to, I want you to hear me loud and clear. You have permission to choose yourself. It is not selfish, it is necessary. You do not have to light yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your age is not a weakness. It is a testament to your strength, a crown of wisdom you have earned. Wear it proudly. You have the absolute right to leave any table where respect is no longer on the menu. You have the right to build a new table, a new life, a new home, even if for a while you are the only one there. Your peace of mind is the most valuable asset you will ever own. Do not ever let anyone, not your spouse, not your friends, and not even your own children, charge you rent for it. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story. Your time and your attention are a gift. If you have ever had to make a difficult, life-altering choice to protect your own happiness, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your journey in the comments below. Let's use this space to remind each other that we are not alone. Please, if my story touched you, give this video a like and subscribe for more. Remember, you are stronger than you think.